go. We're recording. Whew. I totally forgot it another day too. Thank you so much. All right, so let's start a quick screen share here. And let's see, we're going to do this one. All right. Looks like my internet's being a little bit slow today.
I'm impressed with how the soap can stick together. I never thought it would actually work.
I didn't think it would work that strong either.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah, because a friend and I are both starting the soap project at the same time. And she was saying she wanted to connect the soap on the skinny end like this rather than the fat sides together. And I was like, I don't know, if you press on it, is that going to break a second later, you know, having such a skinny connection? But yeah, it's pretty strong, isn't it?
Okay. Impressively so.
Yeah. Okay, so let's just whip through here real quick. We're moving on to the next project. I did put the midterm right up in front at the very beginning of the module, so you guys wouldn't forget. There's no extensions on the midterm, so this has to be done by next Sunday. It's 25 questions. It's worth 50 points. It's the same process as before with true and false, multiple choice, multiple answer. And there's a couple there where I give a picture of a sculpture and you have to decide what qualities it best represents, right? So is it abstract? Is it geometric? Is it organic? Anything like that, right? So that's the one new different kind of question in there. I think I was feeling kind of nice. I'm letting you guys have 2 attempts at this quiz, so I will keep the higher score. So hopefully that gets everybody some good points to keep them in good standing in the class. All right, so moving on to soap. All right, I'm pretty excited about this soap sculpture. I normally teach this project in clay and in plaster, both of which are not something you're going to really want to carve in your own home. And especially for those of you guys that are working in your bedrooms, you definitely don't want those materials in your bedrooms, right? So I'm pretty excited about this soap. These are 2 student sample pieces from Cerritos College. And you can see, you know, you can get an interesting, simple form that is intriguing, right? We really want to be thinking in the round. And although this form on the left, the blue one, is simple, it still makes you want to see where those 2 negative space holes are going. You want to move around it. You want to see what's happening, right? So I think that's really interesting. And yet you can also get really elaborate in how your organic shape comes together and how it moves and flows around itself, right? So I think this one's really interesting too, because there's so many layers of information in this form. Now, interesting enough, the one on the right is freestanding, right? It completely stands up on its own on the table. So that's great. I'm really concerned that they look good in the round. So if you don't make something that's freestanding, you would have to do what this person here did. And what they did is they put a screw up through a shallow board, and then they screwed the soap down onto that screw so that it's like a pedestal and it holds it up. You can also do that through a couple sheets of cardboard if you wanted to create a form that comes to a certain amount of a point, okay? You don't have to do it like the blue one, but it is an option if you want to, you know, create a little stand to make it stand up. Either way, in the end, when we're done with the soap project, we do want it to be able to display in a nice manner, whether that's for it to be freestanding on its own or on a little pedestal. So let's talk about a couple of those concepts that we're really looking at for the soap project. we really want for the SOAP project to be exploring abstract, organic, non-representational form.
Okay, can you guys hear me? Yep.
Yes.
Okay, I just put my ear pods in because I always lose my voice if I don't wear them because I yell at the computer. Okay, bringing the voice down. Okay, so abstract, organic, non-representational form. Believe it or not, this is the hardest project for most students to do because they have a really hard time letting go of the idea of making something representational, okay? So we are not making a thing, we are making an interesting, organic, curvilinear shape, all right? So we wanna have concave curves, we wanna have convex curves, we wanna have soft organic shapes, all right? And we want to utilize negative space to engage the viewer and make them want to see the piece in the round and to lighten up the form. Because we're working in a subtractive method, meaning that we've got a solid mass of soap, and then we're gonna remove material from the soap. We're not gonna add back on, we're just really gonna be removing material. We want to be able to lighten it up and not make it still look like it's just out of this perfect block of soap, right? We want to change it enough that we can't see the original shape of the original block of soap, okay? So you'll notice on this one on the right where they've carved these areas of negative space underneath to really kind of lighten that piece up. Some of them can even get animated. They can look like little blob forms that are gonna pick up and walk away the second you look the other way. Okay, so that is our goal. So let's make sure that we understand all of these terms I've just thrown out there. So abstraction, you know, it's basically what an artist is doing when they're working with an abstract form is they are giving you the essence of an idea or the essence of a form. They're not spelling it out to you in every last detail of what this is. So even though if we look at this Henry Moore piece, we can kind of have an idea that that's a figure, right? We kind of start to think, oh, this must be two legs here. Oh, this kind of looks like an arm here. Yeah, this could be a torso. So yeah, that could be a figure, right? But it doesn't give us an exact head with eyes, nose, ears, mouth, fingers, toes. We don't have all the information. We just kind of have a hint that this is probably a figure. So we are going to be abstracting forms. If you're inspired by something while you start your project, remember you have to abstract it. It cannot be purely representational. Okay. We can see over time, Henry Moore used to like to do a lot of studies of the human figure, often reclining. And so here, this first one was done in 1950. And you can see as his career progressed, his abstraction of the human figure became more and more abstract. So here in 1975, he's created a form that you have a much harder time deciding whether it truly is figurative or not, right? It has a lot more variance. It could be a lot more than just a figure at this point. Now, when we talk about abstraction, abstraction can go both geometric or organic. So if we look back towards history, you know, Cubist art is a lot of abstraction and it's a lot of geometric abstraction. So here is a sample of Jacques Lipchitz's Bather. And this is for another figurative piece, this is a very geometric piece, right, to be representing the figure. Here is another piece by Julio Gonzalez. And I like this piece because I feel like it kind of crosses both lines between geometric and organic because we definitely have the figure in this piece. You can pick out the hat. You know, I'm guessing this is kind of an arm or a hand over here. But it is Monsieur with cactus, right? So we've got the figure, but then we also have the cactus sneaking in, which is a little bit of the organic, right? So we're kind of playing between both. And then we can move on to organic forms. And this is our focus, right? We're going to be making abstract organic forms. So here's a couple historic pieces. This first one is by a famous ceramicist named Ken Price. And he is known for these blobs, basically, that look like they could be like a drop of water or something that's oozing and about to get up and going to crawl away. And he finishes them with really slick surfaces. So this surface here is actually different layers of automotive paint to finish that form. Here's another sculpture by Jean Arp. And this is another great one, a good use of negative space and those nice soft curves. If we go back to the early 1900s, we also have this Brancusi piece that is called Bird in Space. Now, this one is really abstracted, right? Because we don't see a beak, we don't see wings, we don't necessarily see a tail. And if you read what Brancusi was looking for, he was really looking for that essence of flight. So really interesting how you can abstract both the form, but also the meaning or the activity of the form, right? And then here is Dante Hayes. He also works with ceramics as well as other materials. And these are some really interesting organic curvilinear forms. And, you know, as we start to think about, you know, we're in some beginning art classes right now, as we start to think about what our own personal artistic voice is, we tend to do research and we tend to explore certain things, right? He ended up exploring some different areas and some different heritages of his to come up with the work that he makes. And I put this video in here because I think it's really interesting. And I think a couple of you, I know I have one person who likes Spider-Man in this class, right? Well, Dante really likes the Black Panther. So he actually talks about everything from pineapples to the Black Panther and his family life and how all of this ties together to create the work that he makes, right? And I think it's really interesting as artists to really explore and witness how other people process the information that they're researching and how it comes out in their work. So this video is a good one to watch for that. And if any of you have Netflix and you watch the series called Abstract, that's another really good series for listening about how people come up with their process and their research and their artistic voice. So, any questions about abstraction? Any questions about the difference between organic and geometric? Okay, so in the soap, we're not going to see any pure geometric shapes. We're going for the abstract, we're going for the organic. All right, so now the other two topics that are going to contrast one another are the negative space and the mass, right? We are starting off with one massive block, one solid block of soap, right? Our soaps are a couple bars stuck together, creating one bigger bar, one big mass of soap. It's our job to lighten that up and to create enough changes in the shape and the surface to engage the viewer and get the viewer to look around it and walk around it. So one of the ways to do that is to play with negative space. So by creating a hole that goes through the form, that right there makes the viewer want to know, hey, well, what's going on the other side? Where does the hole come out? And here, the way this piece has been photographed, you can see that this hole goes the whole way through, right? You know that it comes out on the other side because you can see the whole way through the piece. if you really want to get a viewer to look to the other side, put that hole on such an angle that the viewer has a hard time knowing where that hole comes out on the other side. So they literally have to walk around to find out where that hole comes out. That is really going to get the viewer to want to see the piece in the round. Okay, so here are a couple ceramic pieces that are done by Chaffey College students. They're actually in the ceramics yard at the college. And these two also use math and negative space. I think what's interesting between this red one and the white one is the white one, the math is part of this horizontal structure because they put in really large areas of negative space. So you've got a lot of that weight is kind of bottom heavy in the sculpture and kind of horizontal, almost like a cradle or a big open bowl form, right? Whereas on the red one, the negative space is quite small. The shape is much more vertical, but that negative space isn't a perfect hole, right? So you really have to explore this one to kind of figure out what's going on in that negative space and where it's going. Exactly what I was talking about is like, if you don't have that perfect tunnel straight through, makes you have to go and check it out a little bit more. All right. Here's another one, Beverly Pepper. So one of us has already used her work in one of the discussions, which is really great. So you guys are exploring some good artists out there. I put her work in because her negative space, we often think of negative space as a hole going through a piece, and it doesn't always have to be a hole. You can see she kind of has this, I don't know, what looks like a ribbon, and it's almost like it's delaminating, and there's this negative line that goes the whole way through. You can tell it goes through because you got this little pop of blue right up here at the top curve, right? And that really catches the eye. So you can use the negative space to frame an environment, right? Or you can use just a thin slit of negative space to kind of, you know, that shadow or that little flick of light that you see from the other side really just grabs some interest there. And then, you know, if your negative space is not just a circle, it becomes possibly a line or a shape, right? So you can do a lot with that as well. And when we think about mass, if we look at this Anish Kapoor piece, this is the Cloud Gate, or some people just call it the Bean. This is located in Chicago. Some people have seen it before, some people haven't, but it's just this huge, massive bean shape, right? But it's made of this stainless steel mirror quality material that reflects the city back at you. And it looks so massive and so heavy, but this archway underneath and the way the reflections play off of the pavement and mirror and reflect back at you, the shadows, the people walking under the piece. And if you really do walk up to and explore it, this actually goes quite a ways in underneath the piece. So you're actually looking into a void when you get under the piece. It kind of has the negative space going directly up into the form. So when you get under there, it's like you're looking up into this big negative space. So it just makes this massive amount of material appear so much lighter, right? It makes you want to walk under there. So it is interesting how you can contrast these two elements against one another. And I threw in one more Henry Moore because I really liked this image of this piece and how this form actually starts to frame out the trees that are in the background, right? You can see some of the trees in the mist through this particular form, okay? So you can use your negative space to frame things as well. Okay, any questions about mass and negative space?
Is negative space going to be required?
It is required, yep. Yep, so you're gonna have to think about, is it something that's gonna be like this one where you know, your piece only touches down in a couple areas and you've got this really nice space underneath that makes your piece look nice and light, almost make it look like it's hovering above the table instead of this big heavy thing that's, you know, planted and never going to move, right? So you can play with the negative space that way, or you can go back and you can play with negative space that goes through the center of the form. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, now because we're going for organic, we're going to be working with the idea of curvilinear, concave, convex. So here I put the drawings on here so you could tell. We've got the really nice undrawn on sculpture on the left, and then the diagram on the right. So here within the black oval, this section is showing you what a convex curve looks like. A convex curve is coming towards you, okay? You know, it's funny, we often use references to the human body, right, for everyone to understand. So the convex curve, it's like a pot belly, right? Nice and round and full. It's like you've inhaled. And then the concave curve is the opposite. Okay, so it's like you've exhaled and all the air has gone out and that curve sinks into the form. And that's represented by the blue line here. Okay, so you're going to be putting together a mix of convex and concave forms. This piece has its negative space right up here. You can see the start of that beautiful shadow, which always is a giveaway that there's some negative space somewhere. So we will be working a lot with the idea of light and shadow on our pieces, especially since we're working with soap, and most of our soap is going to be somewhere in a white to off-white beige tone. Okay, so here's another one, Eva Hild. She's really well known for her negative space and her curvilinear sculptures, right? You can look her up and she makes these all the way from small tabletop size to massive monumental pieces. And sometimes they can take on a look of maybe a vertebrae, how she has like, you know, this kind of tubular form right here, and then it repeats here. And if we could see behind this section, there's a little repeat of it back inside of this negative space. So it kind of has this tubular form that kind of ties the whole piece together, even though we've got these big flanges and waves and curves coming out from it. And then she always has the negative space going through there as well. I like this detail where you're kind of looking through multiple openings of the negative space through one of her larger forms. And last but not least, this one down here is a student sample. This is actually done in plaster rather than soap, but there's no reason this couldn't be done in soap. So looking at these nice curved spiral forms and how they intertwine with one another. So here's the front, and you get an idea that something is happening back here, right? And when you turn around and you see it from the back, you do see that, you know, these two ends of this form are about to curl around one another. And then in the front, you have this wave coming out towards the viewer. And in the back, it's this nice little teardrop shape. So a lot of intertwining of form and of curves. Okay, so here are some student samples of the actual soap carvings, okay? So this is the same piece right here, just from different angles. So here's the front. And what is very loopy, for lack of a better term, this almost even looks like a figure 8 right here on the front. From the back, it's a little bit more pod-like, comes to a point. And then you can see this little tail kind of comes up and intertwines. And this loop here kind of sticks off the front of the form a little bit. That creates a lot of interest right there. Next one up, this one looks, I don't know why, but this one makes me think of the the alien creature from the original Predator movie. So I think it's just something about this long, like kind of almost like triangular shaped head up here. But this has a lot of different interesting things going in. These big round spheres or balls that kind of show up in different areas of the form, they kind of remind me of joints, like maybe they're a moving mechanism or something. So it's interesting how they played that off. They have a plane change, this curves down into a line here, which creates a nice shadow. We've got the negative space going through it. And we've taken, if this were the square of soap, we've taken a lot of material away here to lighten that, the mass of the entire form. And it gives us a really interesting contour or outline for the form. And then here's a few different ones. These don't relate to each other in any way in the bottom row, just more samples. This one makes me think of, maybe a snake or a duck or something. So that's interesting. I like how these pile on top of each other and have some good movement and flow to them. I'd say, here we've got the most color of any of them. I don't know if anyone's found colored soap to work with, but it could be done, I think. This one's a lot more blocky, right? This one, compared to the rest, this one you still have the idea of the original shape or the idea of a bar of soap, right? You kind of can still see that original dimension. But it's interesting when you really change up the shape, it makes the whole thing look a little larger, right? Like you can't identify what the original form was that it came from. So it makes the overall sculpture feel larger than it really is. Any questions or thoughts about what you're seeing from the student work samples?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
If not to be annoying, but I'm wondering why we learn non-representational, or I guess a better question is like, what's the point of non-representational art? I'm just curious.
It is to push your creativity. Every new thing that's out there and invented has never existed before, and basically could be considered non-representational because it doesn't exist, right? So it's, it's funny because, we start off as kids and we're kind of open and free to create whatever we want and we're okay with everything. And as soon as we start to know that, most hands have 5 fingers and, we get these scenarios of what things are supposed to look like, we get really trapped in by that. And so I always like to assign this non-representational organic project because, you can pop out of it too. Like we don't have to stick with what's already there and what's already exists. And this is a good way to get you guys thinking outside of what we already know. That sound like a good reason to do it?
It does sound like a good reason.
Hey, this is how the new comic book characters and villains and, cartoon people and all of those, that's how this stuff's created, right? It's kind of like just pushing things out of the norm.
I see. It makes me think of Phineas and Ferb, with one with the triangle head and another one with this rectangular head, and one side and 2 different size eyes. It's funny.
Yeah, see? You just got to think about this from the right angle, right? And then it gets more fun and interesting. But you can see it's the project that students have the hardest time with because, yeah, they're a little like, what? Why? But okay. So I've given you a list of terms in case you need to come back and I referenced something. You might want to come back to this list of terms to be sure. So things I'm going to be looking for when I'm grading them is, that you were abstract, you were curvilinear. You might want to try and challenge yourself and have an asymmetrical form. So remember that asymmetrical is a piece that's not exactly the same on both sides, and that will help pull the viewer's eye around the work. That also is similar to dynamic form. If you have a static form, it's very grounded and very basic in its shape, whereas a dynamic form has a lot of movement and it pulls the viewer to look the whole way around the piece, right? And that's what we're going for. We want something that's interesting to be viewed in the full round, the whole way around. So gesture, you know, we're hoping to have an interesting gesture in the piece. So the gesture would be, you know, like that one student sample where it was the figure 8. That's a gesture in a 3-dimensional form, that movement of the form. So last week I provided you with this information about sourcing the soap for the project. I'm not going to go through this again because I already talked to you about it last week, and it's here in case you need to read through it. I'm hoping some of you already have soap and are ready to play around, because that brings us to today's assignment. So this week's assignment, hands-on, is going to be a 2-part assignment. You are going to sketch your ideas for what you want to carve in the soap sculpture. And you're also going to start playing around with your extra piece of soap to learn how to manipulate it. Okay, so step 1, the sketching. We are going to sketch at least 3 different ideas, all right? So think of it as 3 different characters or 3 different forms. But you need to explore what they're going to look like all the way around, right? Because we're creating something in the round. That means you have to sketch that from more than one angle. So you're going to sketch the front, the back, maybe the side or the top, depending what's most important for what you're working on. And then I would like you to explore what you could do with the surface of that form, okay? I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a second when I'm demoing. So in the end, you're going to have 3 ideas, but you're going to have 4 sketches for every one of those ideas. So that is 12 sketches in total, right? Okay, good. And then the second part of this assignment is that we are going to take our 1 extra bar of soap and we're going to play around and we're going to start to learn what tools we like to work with. You know, we're going to try some knives and some cheese cutters and maybe a vegetable peeler, different things for cutting. And we're going to try different things for making texture. And I want you guys to try to come up with 5 textures and be able to do a smooth surface as well. So I'm going to pop over and talk about all of that in just a second here. While you're doing the texture and the trying out of the carving of the soap, I want you guys to photograph that along the way so you have process shots of that, because you're going to turn the process shots into me, okay? So that's for next Sunday. That and the midterm are the only things you have due this week, unless you're still working on details for your metal sculpture, okay? Any questions before I pop over and give you a hands-on demo that you can see me working with the soap? Nope, okay. I will ask that again after I play around and demo for a little while. So we'll come back to the computer after in case you have more questions. Okay, so let's get this straight. So we're going to stop video here. Okay, so I should have this spotlighted, I hope, so that you guys can keep an eye on what I'm doing. It's funny, every time oh,
Professor, your video is not showing.
ah, okay, hopefully I'm coming back here. So every time I put my phone in the fancy phone holder, I somehow hit the emergency call button. And so I was just doing like a 911 call a second ago. And then it kicked me off of Zoom. Okay, so how are we now?
Your other account is, I believe, spotlighted, so your other camera isn't like the main focus for us.
Okay, thank you. Okay. And now if I can get this on without hitting the emergency call scenario. Ooh, okay. Everybody can see and hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Yay. Okay, so let's start with the sketching portion of this idea. So we know we're going to have a big old block of soap like this, right? So there's two ways you could do it. If you're comfortable sketching large, you could just, you know, sketch your ideas just straight onto a piece of paper. If it helps you out, you could also just go ahead and trace your block of soap onto your sketchbook and get an idea of what size you're working with. And you could start to draw some of your ideas, you know, inside of these blocks, right? Just playing around with some curves and how things could come off of one another. Now see, there's actually some freedom here because you're not trying to make anything that looks like any one thing. So now you've got the freedom to just draw some curves, see what comes out. All right. So if that's what it looks like on this side of the soap. So I've got a side that's 3 bars wide, but then I just have a narrow side. So then I've got to figure out what's that going to look like on the narrow side, right? So maybe I can start to visualize, okay, so on the narrow side, this is going to be a big curve in the front here. And that's going to come up to a couple small forms. And then this is going to be kind of scooping right towards me here. This is going to be super foreshortened in my sketch. It's going to look kind of funny, but I can understand what that's going to be. Okay. So you can see how by having the soap drawn here, it kind of tells you where you can go, right? Because then the next step after you've made your sketches and you've done either, you know, 3 sides this way, or you've done these 2 sides on the top, whatever you need the information for. to get this from the paper to the soap, then you're going to want to draw this onto the soap, right? So we would be looking at this going, okay, so this is going to curve through here. Now, my pencil doesn't draw on the soap, so it's really just a very faint line that carves into the soap a little bit. I was trying this today, and I don't know how long it'll work, but it seems like a Sharpie marker will draw on the soap, but eventually the soap might take up the marker. We'll see how long it works. I have to turn the pen a little bit because as the soap builds up on the pen, it wants to stop working. But you can see how we're going to transfer our sketch onto the soap, okay? And then once we know where we need to take the soap away, that's where we're going to start to get our tools out. And we're going to start investigating what works best to remove the material, okay? So again, you could have just a basic kitchen paring knife. This isn't too sharp. I found today that with the ivory soap, ivory is a little softer than other soaps, and I could literally just carve this away with a vegetable peeler really easily. So we're going to basically rough in the basic shape here. So the ivory is a little bit brittle too. So there, I purposely did that because I knew I needed to take away this whole corner. So I put my knife in and I flexed it and it chipped off the whole corner. I don't recommend doing that unless you know you have a huge amount of soap you need to take away. Because if you break something off, you can't put it back on, right? You're tied into that then. So that's something to be careful of. All right, so this is very frontal right now. I envision that this is a large curve going back. So one thing that I want to do is I want to bring the surface down. And, you know, it might be the type of thing you could do with the tip of the knife. Maybe you could use the tip of the vegetable peeler to kind of dig a little trench out of there. So that works kind of well. Have any of you taken ceramics class before?
No.
No?
No, I have not either.
Okay. So you probably don't have any of these ceramics tools then. These are kind of nice for carving.
Yes, I have.
You've taken all the ceramic classes.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes, I have.
good. So Jamie, you can use your ceramic tools then.
Yes. I still have some in my room.
Perfect.
So
Lucky you. Okay, so I'm trying to think of all kinds of things that you have at home that you wouldn't need to get a ceramics tool. I mean, you can use your X-Acto knife. It's just a little sharper, but you can definitely use that to get in here and carve away. For me, this ivory soap actually feels pretty soft in that I have to be careful with it. With the slightly harder soaps, I feel like I have a little more control over the surface I'm creating and how fast I'm removing material. The ivory, I have to be very aware all the time about how deep I'm cutting and what that's going to mean later. All right, so I want this not to be such a corner. See how this comes out to a corner here? I want this to be much softer and rounder, so I'm actually going to try and soften this edge a little more. Are any of you out there sensitive to smells?
Very. I had purchased one soap, and when I put it together, I couldn't breathe around it. So I had to get unscented soap.
I am wishing I did right now. I've never used ivory soap before. And I bought it because it was such a nice rectangular shaped bar, but I
Mhm.
cannot stand the smell of this right now. I'm
got
trying not to
This
breathe
one.
in.
Can you guys see?
Like I can't see, but hopefully they,
Oh,
oh
yeah.
no, because I'm spotlighted, they won't actually
Oh.
be able to see. Whew. Has anyone checked out what kind of soap they have at the dollar store? Do they have any good soap there?
No.
Nope. Okay. Whoops.
Do you recommend gloves for like sweaty hands?
Oh yeah, if you are a person with sweaty hands, yeah, you might want gloves. Although it's supposed to be really cold the next few days, you can work outside. You won't get sweaty out there.
Okay.
It's supposed to rain on Wednesday and Thursday, but then it's going to be super cold too. So this is a clay tool that makes holes, and you just twist it. But you know, you can use an actual drill bit. If you have somebody with tools around, you could get a drill bit and you could just drill through there with a drill bit by hand. You could use your vegetable peeler. If you guys don't know, the tip on a vegetable peeler actually is this shape in order to dig the little eyes out of potatoes, right? So you could just use that to drill your hole right through your form. That's working really well. Yep, that's a happy find right there. Man, look at that thing go. All right, so your vegetable peeler is going to be your friend in this particular case. And notice how instead of just going straight through the form like this, I'm going at a really strong angle so that I create a really interesting negative space rather than, you know, just something very predictable. All right, so I'm gonna have that there. And I will start to, that kind of gets the negative space going. Can you guys see that nice angle there?
Yes.
And I want the overall shape to be more of a teardrop shape. So I'm just gonna open this up a little bit more with my knife. So now that's a nice teardrop instead of just this very predictable round opening. And now I'm going to come back over here and start working this curve a little bit more again. I want this curve to come the whole way around to the other side of the bar. So this project's going to be the project that you could just sit with quietly, you know, and just slowly carve and work your way through this block of soap. It might even be the type of project that you might, you know, just put a movie or a TV series on Netflix and just let it play in the background while you spend a few hours doing this, because it's just kind of a slow going, work your way through the math. But you want to be focused enough that you don't cut material away that you need later, right? That's going to be super important.
If you have carving tools, do you still recommend the potato peeler?
For making that hole, that was pretty darn nice.
Yeah, it looks good.
say. And since it's just soap, you'll still be able to use your potato peeler in the end.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're welcome to use any tools on this project that work for you. So just because I haven't said it doesn't mean it's off limits. I just hadn't thought of it yet. So. Okay, so I'm starting to get that to be a nice rounded curve down here now. Okay, now when we were looking at the images a few minutes ago, we were looking at a Barbara Hepworth piece, and it was the one that had the hole through it. It was a white marble, and she had some nice plane changes on the surface of her piece. And basically what the plane change does is it creates a really nice shadow, okay? So when I look at this soap here right now, I have a very subtle curve that goes the whole way around. But if I were to create a little bit of a plane change, I could create a nice line that catches a nice shadow to it. So what that would mean is just changing the angle of the surface a little. That's what I mean by a plane change. So right now I'm kind of angling this plane out a little bit because I'm going to try to get a shadow line that comes down kind of the front edge of this a little more. So I'm creating this angle. Now the original form is flat from the bar soap, right? Well, I'm going to try to make this a little bit more concave to catch that shadow a little bit more. So I've got just playing with some of these different tools to see what they'll do. It's kind of like watching paint dry, isn't it? You can see it's going to be a very slow meditative process to carve the soap. That's why I want to get those sketches approved for you guys so that you guys can do this over spring break if you want to. Trying to find a good angle for you to see this on camera. So basically, to the right side of where my tool is running down this form, the angle of the soap is diagonaled and cut back. Down here, it's just flat like the original bar soap was. And over here, I started making it concave. I started scooping it away. And what I'm hoping to do is to create what's going to catch a shadow right here. And it kind of depends on the light and how it's hitting your soap, you know, how that shadow is going to be seen. Can you see that shadow right there?
Yes.
It's hard for me to come up because then I end up in the shadow of the camera. So, but that's what I mean by a plane change. So you can have something, you know, you could have a literal texture somewhere, but you could also just have a really simple change of angle in the soap that will catch a shadow like that. And we can really see that in the Barbara Hepsworth piece in the module. I'll show it one more time when I'm done demoing, so you can really see what I'm talking about and the plane changes and how that becomes interesting. Okay. So, but basically this is how I'm going to work through the soap. I'm going to map out what I generally need, and I'm going to work a little on each side before I refine one side. You know, I need to keep working away all this material until I get what I want. Okay. So that's the big picture of how the sketches are going to end up transferred onto the soap. Now, the main carving, that's not due till after spring break. What's due by Sunday is our experimental carving, so we can get used to our soap. So like I said, the ivory soap is really quite soft. This is a bar of Lever 2000, and it is much firmer. So I can use a much stronger hand when I work it. And I also get a much nicer surface at the end. Yeah, so the firmer soap really does leave a much cleaner surface. So the things I want you to get used to while you're playing around with your soap is finding out what tools work. So let's see if the peeler works on the harder soap, but look, I get much smaller flakes of material coming off. All right. I am able to create a much nicer, smoother surface with the harder soap. That's interesting. All right, now let's see what else we can do for creating different textures. I'd like you to come up with 5 different textures, okay? So, you know, you can try different tools and things that you find around the house. You could try the point of your knife, the point of your X-Acto knife. You know, one texture is, you know, twisting your knife in and creating some small dot forms. You know, texture is really the creation of a lot of pattern when you think about it. And so you can have one simple mark that you do over and over again, and it can create a good pattern. You know, like here's a cup that the person just created a dot pattern over and over again to create this. And it's really quite interesting, right? There's nothing overly special about it other than where they chose to put the dots and how big they were. So that's basically why you're playing around with this. It's like, okay, how can I make some dots? Okay, what tool could I use to make some lines? I'm gonna go back to the X-Acto knife because I know you guys have X-Acto knives. So maybe you can dig out some areas with the X-Acto knife. Let's see what happens there. Oh, it chips a little. That's interesting. So that's going to be a super organic texture because you're not going to have a lot of control over it because it is going to chip around the edges. Okay, let's see what we can do with making lines. There is a tendency for the soap to want to flake. So it might be that we find that we don't like any of the textures we come up with. We don't know until we try our soap and our particular tools that we have at home. I know that these little loop tools, they do create a nice little cutout pattern. So you could do like a little pattern that looks like fish scales. The interesting thing about the scale that we're working in is the pattern will probably end up being quite small because the scale of the material we're working with is quite small. So if you did a large pattern, you'd only get, you know, 2 or 3 marks before you ran out of space. So the fact that we're working on soap already predicts that we're going to be trying to do some small mark making to create pattern. Well, that pattern's not bad. That's quite nice, actually. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Hope so. All right. So that is going to be something for you guys to investigate, is if and how you can do some patterns. And it's, you know, for this bar of soap, this is the experimental bar, and that's all it's for, is experimenting and trying things on it. So you should, by Sunday, be photographing something that just looks like a menagerie of mark making, right? After you've tried making a hole and you've tried carving some material away to see what tools are going to work best for you. This is so that you can know your tools and know your material before you get going on the real object, right? So this is all for experimental reasons for you, for practice, okay? Any questions about the textures and what you need to do with this experimental bar of soap?
I got it.
No
All right.
questions at the moment, but thank you.
Okay, good. All right, I'm gonna go with silence as you're all good. So you can see here, you can, by cutting back and forth, you can create some nice deep direction changes with the soap. What this knife would do. Oh, by using a serrated knife, you can carve line. Oh, there's a nice texture. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Barely.
Yeah, it's hard to see, but boy, that serrated knife really gave a nice linear texture to the surface. Yeah, so this might be one of those things where you really need to like look around your house and think outside the box, you know, think about where you have tools that could work on the soap. Are there beauty tools, maybe something for doing fingernails, or fishing tools, or I don't know, anything goes, kitchen tools. So many options of what you can work with. All right, I'm just gonna come back over. Okay, so let me go back to that Barbara Hepworth picture just one more time, so I can just clarify what I was talking about with the plane changes on the surface, because I think that's a really important one. Let's see. Okay, here it is. So this is what I'm talking about with the plane changes. So, you know, this is a general overall soft form, but do you see how nice this plane change right here catches the shadow and it creates this line? So just by changing the angle on either side of that edge, it just creates an edge in the form that creates a line. And the way the light hits that is what gives us so much value change on the surface of the sculpture. Pardon me?
Are you supposed to be screen sharing?
Yes. And now hopefully I am. Okay, so here's the Barbara Hepworth piece, and here's what I was talking about. So it's these lines here, okay? So see, this is beveled in, it's kind of concave interior here, and this angles back the other way, and so it comes to a peak right where this line is formed, and that's why this side catches the shadow so well, because it's going away from the light, and then the light's just coming in and radiating through here. So just that really subtle change of angle can create these really nice lines. So even though the texture is smooth, you can create a plane change that creates a nice line that draws the viewer's eye around the form. Does that make sense to everybody?
Kind of.
Okay. Well, try and do that on your sample piece of soap, right? Because one, it'll make it make more sense, and it's good practice to try and manipulate the way the shadow and the light catches on your form. And that way, if you've practiced it, then maybe you can utilize it on the final form, right?
Right.
Okay. All right. Well, I think I have covered what I wanted to cover with you guys. I covered the highlights. You guys can go back and read through the module and get more information from reading what I wrote and analyzing those pictures and the samples I gave you. And I'm happy to answer any additional questions. All right. So midterm this week, due by Sunday, and these sketches and the experimenting with the soap is due by Sunday as well. And I will turn around the grading of the sketches as fast as possible. So watch the comments after you post me your sketches, watch those comments on the assignment sheet, because that's where I'm gonna reach back out to you and give you feedback, okay? All right, got a thumbs up. I think we're good for today. And I guess I will see you guys after spring break. I'm happy to answer questions via email all through spring break even. I'm not taking spring break. I'm just here at the computer. So any questions anytime, I'll be here to answer them.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, you guys. Have a good one.
All right, bye.
Bye.